All right, we are live. Today is Thursday, November 18th. Well, in some parts of the world, it's Thursday, November 18th. This is our fortnightly design meeting. And before we get into anything on the agenda, we should probably go around and do some quick introductions. I'm happy to start. My name is Jen Lampton. I'm joining from Oakland, California, where it's starting to feel a little bit like winter. I haven't been around for the last few weeks, so I'm really excited to see all the stuff that's going on in the Backdrop community, but let's turn it over to Greg.
Hi, my name is Greg. I'm joining from Greece. I've been working in various issues here and there. I would like to discuss about inline forms today. And before we do that, pass it on to Tim.
Yeah, hi, I'm Tim in Deerwood, Minnesota. And yeah, gosh, lots of things going on. So let's just get to it. So, Ben, are you ready to take over again? Or?
Sure. So as Greg mentioned, we have added the issue number 1040 for inline form errors to the agenda. We talked about that a little bit before we started the recording. It's something that I think could be really useful for Backdrop in general. Right now, if you have a problem on a form, there's a little error printed at the very top of the page that tells you what the problem is, but it doesn't indicate where on the form the error has occurred. Some form elements will get a nice red border around them so that you can tell that there's a problem with that particular element. But if you end up having 4 or 5 errors on the form, knowing which error matches to which element can be a little problematic. This solution is something that had been implemented in 888 and carried forward to 999, where it will take the particular error and put it directly on the field to indicate what the problem is and how to fix it, which is nice. There are a bunch of issues that have come up with the Drupal 8 implementation that cause some forms to have no errors and some forms to have errors that appear in problematic ways. So we just need to figure out if we're going to implement the same type of solution, if we want to try and mitigate any of the problems that we know came up in the Drupal 8 implementation. Robert was here earlier when we talked about this, and he mentioned that CVCRM has something similar. It's not Drupal 8's form error solution, inline form error solution. It's a different one using a HTML or even JavaScript library, I think. And that we might want to take a look at their implementation and see how they did it. It might inform our decision on how to do that going forward. Greg, you've been following this issue more closely than anyone else. I don't know if you want to give us an update.
Yeah, because it took us quite a while, sort of like scheduling what's going to go into 121. I started working on not working on a PR, but working on drafting a PR or working on my local to start doing the PR. And then I noticed there's other things that need to be done, like some accessibility problems with the form API that needed to be sorted. So the only problem that I was aware from my little bit of research that I've done with the D8 inline forms was that sometimes when you submit the form, the error is there, but you're not automatically scrolled to the portion of the form that has the error. So, and if the form is way too long, and then you're at the bottom of the form, then the error that comes up is outside your viewport. Whereas with the current implementation, you basically get a page refresh where the page scrolls at the top, and then you see the message that is at the top. So anyway, I just got into the usual rabbit hole of playing catch with things that need to be sorted first. And I've raised another issue, which is 5346, which is basically natively support HTML5 required and area required properties for the form API. And that's to sort some accessibility issues. The pull request for it is small. I still need to sort out some automated tests errors and fix them. But the problem with that is that it switches into the native error messages that browsers support. So I have 2 screenshots at the bottom of that issue. And it shows basically that the native error messages take over, and they do not allow you to add any custom error message to say what is the expectation. Like you get the bulk, please fill in this field error messages. So Drupal has also an issue for that. So then I raised issue 5348, which basically will allow the these native browser errors to be customized. So I think before I start doing any work on the 1040 issue, we should address these issues. My concern with the last issue that I mentioned, 5348, is that it's a new feature request in the form API, which means if we treat it as a feature, it won't be able to get in until 121. So this needs to happen first before I work on 1040. So this is where the current status is at. So I'm not sure if we manage to finalize that issue early and it gets merged, then I will be able to switch back to 1040 and see if I can get it done.
Can you drop a link to that issue in the Zulip chat?
Yep. So this is the initial issue, 5346. And if you scroll to the very last message, you will see the two screenshots. So basically, we have custom messages that say the title is a required field or something like that, whatever we say. But native browser errors say, please fill in this field for every field. So you don't have the opportunity to throw custom error messages to people. And then the other issue is linked from that last message, and it's this.
Great.
Oh, by the way, I should mention that for 5348, as our Drupal brothers mentioned, it's a minor backwards compatible API addition only. So I have added it as a feature request because it is a new feature, but I was asking if it can be considered a task. Bless you.
Thank you.
So yeah, if it's considered a task, then we can work on it and merge it earlier, and then I can start working on the other issues. That is, if I don't bump into other, like if I don't come across any other rabbit holes that need to be sorted before I start working there.
Yeah, we'd have to run that by a core committer. I think if it's going to need tests, it's not going to qualify as a task. Might have to go in. But that doesn't mean this and the inline form errors can't both go into 121.
Yeah.
So
my point is that even if I don't manage to get 1040 done in this circle, at least I would like to bring it as close to completion as possible, and then fix any satellite issues around it, and then get it done for next release. But, yeah.
So what you're looking to, it's, we could get this merged into 21, and then you could build off of that to do the other work, even if it doesn't.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, some of these things are in order to have features in place that I can take advantage of for building the end feature, but some of them are actually blockers. There might be like accessibility issues that need to be sorted first.
Well, right, but the point is you just need to get it merged. You don't actually need to get it released. So it doesn't actually have to be in a bug fix release for you to proceed.
Yeah,
as long as it's merged.
Yeah, the other alternative that I can think is I can add a temporary pull request in the 1040 issue, which includes all these changes for the purposes of people testing it. And then if we're happy with that, I'm happy to close that pull request and, you know, break it down to smaller pull requests that get accepted. But yeah, either way.
So there wasn't anything you were particularly looking for that I could help with right now, right? You're not at a testing stage, obviously.
Well, I have a question in my pull request, in one of my pull requests for it. The changes that went into core are changing what is my understanding is a helper function. So my understanding is that any function that starts with an underscore is sort of like local to that module. And if we change it, we're not breaking anything, most likely. So my question is like, should I change it? Basically rename it, or would we need a backwards compatibility wrapper around it? Like, do we do that for helper functions as well?
Yeah, in general, I think it's not an API change. We don't strictly need it. If it's something that Form API functions use frequently, it might be nice to add a backwards compatible wrapper function with a deprecation watchdog notice anyway. I know we ran into that a lot with Drupal 7's like number validate integer or whatever, where we don't use this anymore in Backdrop. But there were so many contrib modules that use this because they had number fields. It might still be valuable to provide the wrapper functions so that you don't get PHP errors. And then also the watchdog notice so that people who are using the functions have a really easy way to identify and fix problems with them. So I could go either way on that one. I would say it depends on what the function is and what got changed about it.
The function is underscore form set class, which is basically now changed to also add other attributes. So it needs to be renamed to something like form underscore form set attributes and not set class, because it's doing something in addition to what it was doing before.
Yeah.
And then we need to change all the places where we were calling underscore form set class to underscore form set attributes.
I wonder if we I feel like we should keep both through 1.x. I feel like this is something that I feel like it's likely to be used somewhere other than in core.
So yeah, I provided a link to the pull request with the question as I have it there.
Yeah.
So just so that you can see what kind of change it is. And we can just leave it as a to-do thing. But I'm happy to add a helper function, like a wrapper function around it so that we don't break things. So yeah, it's these sorts of sort of like tiny issues, not necessarily bugs or problems, but things that need cleanup or sorting before I can actually work on the inline error issue, the main one, the main pull request. So yeah. Did anyone want to bring up any other UX or design issues?
Well, we're pretty close to the end of the meeting, so we'll have our very short meeting today.
I guess if this is just kind of quick open discussion, so what your guys' thoughts are on kind of an idea I've had with accessibility. It seems like the approach that we've taken with accessibility up to this point is to just kind of hard code accessibility stuff here and there when it's needed. what would be the thought on kind of modularizing accessibility in such a way that it kind of overrides anything that's done elsewhere, but then it can kind of be extended, kind of make it its own piece that is almost, I guess, a module, if you will, of accessibility. I realize most of accessibility is overriding CSS, things of that nature. And I understand that there's some other pieces that how you deal with form fields and whatnot tie in with accessibility. But the other thought is also to have a switch specifically for accessibility that's easy for people with those kinds of problems to be able to toggle something to where you have the site that's designed specifically for accessibility, but then we can incorporate things that would benefit those who don't need accessibility. I don't know. I'm just kind of curious what general thoughts are on that, and if it's something worth trying to create an issue around and get more discussion, or if it's
So
everybody just kind of find the way
in
things are.
general, our approach to accessibility is that if there is something in backdrop that isn't accessible and should be, we should just do it. It shouldn't be something anyone needs to opt into, because accessibility features aren't something that like some people will need and some people won't need. It's like everybody's going to need that at some point in their life. And so it shouldn't be up to that person to like tell the website they need the feature. It should just always be there. That said, you are right that there are a lot of things on any given site that can be customized to make a site more accessible. And it's really hard to get like 100% of those features that everyone's going to need on every site in core. And I think there are a collection of accessibility modules that exist for Drupal. I don't know how many of them exist for Backdrop that would give you more control over specific things that would make your site more accessible. But you're right that most of those things that change are things that get changed in the theme. They're things like adding attributes, like adding ARIA roles or ARIA labels, or even things like contrast, right? Which is really hard. We can do that in Basis, but if you have another theme, we can do that in 7. But if you're using a different admin theme, it's just hard for us to control. In general, though, I would say if you find something that you think isn't accessible enough, we should just try and make it better in core. And if people want to change the way that that's done for their individual site, we need to make sure that there are tools available to do that, whether it's a module or something they can override in their theme, or even like a setting. Like, for example, the search form now has like a setting where you can provide your own, what's that called? The placeholder text, stuff like that. We could add where we thought it made sense to do. So I think there's also an issue for views exposed forms to do something similar. So there's places like that where we can add settings directly in core that'll make it easier for people to make things more accessible to people. It's hard to talk about in general though, because there's so many specific examples of stuff. So I would say if you have you're probably working on making a site accessible right now, and you probably have a list. I would say it would be really beneficial for us to see those specific items and what we can do to make each one of those better.
Okay. Go ahead.
Two points. So we have an accessibility, so like specialist in the company that I work for. And because they're slacking randomly various things that the people that do not have the issues, that we're not aware of them, she made us aware of things like, I can't remember what they're called, like accessibility widgets or plugins, browser plugins, and they're horrible. And this was coming from a person that needs accessibility. So it wasn't from a developer perspective saying, oh, I don't want to implement this. Is a person that actually needs to use accessibility features saying, these do not work, they make things worse. So I don't think that we should add any such solution in core. We could leave that to contrib. And if any site wants to go for a very quick solution that promises to solve every accessibility issue, that should be in contrib. That's one thing that I wanted to say. And the other thing was that I'm not sure when you joined, Phil, but one of the issues that I was mentioning was an accessibility issue that required a forum API change to accommodate for accessibility in the future. So when a change can be applied in a way that would benefit not only core, but contrib, like forms in general, we make sure that it's added on such a level. but there's certain things that have to be specific, as Jen said, to the use case and the site, which we cannot predict. Or if we try to predict, we might make wrong assumptions and then break things for other people, or make it more difficult for them to add accessibility to their site or improve it.
So where I'm coming from is two different pieces on this. One piece is to kind of create an API for accessibility. That way we don't have to remember we added this form field. Oh yeah, we now have to deal with accessibility. Part of building that form field is to call on the accessibility API so that it just automatically pulls the accessibility related issues down to it. I mean, I don't know the coding side well enough to know if that's even a possibility, which is kind of why I'm asking. But the other piece of it too is on the front end. I agree that core should do as much as possible to deal with accessibility for all front-facing themes. My thought though is to have a switch for the development side of the theme. Maybe a future theme that is more congruent with actual site management, and that would have a toggle to go between usability versus accessibility. Great example is the image field. When you have the title field and the alt field for an image, one stacks on top of the other. My suggestion was to put what each one of those was in as a placeholder to reduce space. That way, if you've got 15, 20 different images, it's not this huge list that you have to scroll through because it's all filled up with these form fields. You can reduce a lot of pixels by putting the title of, the image title and the alt title inside as a placeholder. But that was brought up as we can't do that because it's accessibility. So it's like, people that don't need the accessibility, they're suffering because now they have to deal with an additional 10, 15 pixels of height per image field. Whereas, the accessibility people, it doesn't affect them at all because that's what we're going for.
That specific problem though, is that you're saying that the developers who are building the sites don't need the features that they're building, which is not the point. Like the point with the alt attribute, that's not for the developer. That's for every other human being who visits that website. Yeah. And so just because the developer doesn't like putting it in doesn't mean they can't build the feature that 99% of people are going to need.
It's not about not.
And so it's not like that interface. We can't do that for accessibility. It isn't that interface is accessibility. It's the accessibility of the website that we're talking about. And so it's like, if we build an interface that's easier for developers to use, that means all backdrop websites are going to be less accessible. I mean, there's other ways we can solve those problems too. Like, default values are good, but if every default value for an image is like the file name, that doesn't add any value as an alternate text. Like, humans need to think about like what is in this image and describe the image. Like, there is no default value for an image that we could provide that would include that. This maybe isn't the great example because I know that there's a lot of other stuff that you mentioned that isn't covered by this, but there isn't a website that doesn't need accessibility features. So
I understand. Most of what I'm saying though deals with UI related things.
Right.
It comes down to that issue was about saving pixels. It had nothing to do with removing the alt field or anything of that nature. It purely was about let's save pixels. That way, folks that don't need the screen readers, because that's apparently the issue with putting placeholders in is for screen readers. So those of those of us that don't use a screen reader, we can save that space, and visually, it's easier for us to understand the UI. Right now, it's difficult to understand the UI because there's so much height involved with wasted pixels. That's the point that I'm trying to make. And I feel like we could have two different themes. One is an accessibility theme built specifically for developers who need accessibility. We could have the
there's
theme.
No such thing as developers who need it and developers that don't.
Yeah.
Like,
I don't use I don't use accessibility stuff though.
Well, now, but like next week, you're going to get a hit in the head and you're going to need it. and then you're not going to need it the week after that. Like, accessibility isn't something that is only needed by blind people.
So
It's something that, yeah, go ahead, Greg.
And I understand where you're coming from. Like the first bit when you started talking, I was ready to agree with you, and I still agree with what you said in the first bit, and I'll explain what I'm saying. But how you put it, like I know what you're saying. You want to fix, for example, a thing that bothers sighted people. But then if we fix it that way, then we break accessibility for non-sighted people. That's what you're saying. So if I'm a sighted person, at this point, as Jen said, at this point, because you don't know what's going to happen in the future, I don't need it. And I was looking for ways for browser detection to see if what is accessing the page is actually a screen reader or an accessibility enabled browser. Like if it's a person that is actually doing that. If we had a way to know that the person that is actually accessing this page now needs accessibility features, then we could have a toggle. But then you don't have a way to know that.
I don't even think that counts either, though, because like accessibility features include things like contrast, and that affects all sighted people. So like there's like people who are red, green, colorblind, can't see specific things that other people can.
I agree, but the specific example that Phil was saying is he proposed a UI improvement, which would be an improvement for sighted people. But if we did it that way, then it would break accessibility for non-sighted people. And
I think we might need to talk about this thing like as a specific example though too, because I can't imagine a change that would benefit sighted people that would negatively affect unsighted people. Like if it's something like placeholder text or default value text, like that benefits everyone and it doesn't save pixels. So I think I might not know exactly what we're talking about here. I think it might be more useful to look at the specific problem too.
So imagine a page with hundreds of images and fields that have a label. So what Phil suggested is that I have hundreds of these. So if I hide the labels, move the labels, from being a separate thing into the field as a placeholder, then I reduce the length of the page. So sighted people don't have to scroll as much, right? Yes, you benefit sighted people that way in this specific scenario, but then using placeholder text breaks accessibility for people that need it. So that's the issue there.
Yeah,
I'm not trying to advocate one way or another. I'm just trying to bring up a little bit of discussion around this. I've kind of wondered to myself for a while, is it worth trying to just cram everything to literally fit everybody? Or is it worth going, okay, 80% of people do not need these accessibility features.
Well, 100% of people are going to need them at some point in their life. And you aren't going to know when they're going to need them and when they're not. So you can't use that number.
At the same time, though, it's a choice whether or not I want to use the accessibility features. It comes down to a personal choice. You know, you start cramming.
But you're not just choosing for you, though.
Yeah.
Unless you're the only person to log into that website.
I think that the disagreement there is that I agree with Jen because it's a philosophical thing, as in a philosophy, not a theoretical. Like it's a philosophy thing that we should have accessibility always for everybody at all times. And I know where Phil is coming from, which is like, I personally don't need it. So, and I think that most people don't need it right now. I don't. I want to have the option. Yeah, I know what you're saying, right? But it makes things harder for people that do need it.
I also think there's other solutions to these problems too that might solve both of them, right? Like moving a label in line would prevent the scrolling issue.
That is one option.
Right?
That creates additional issues, like when you start dealing with mobile and it shrinks it down on mobile. Then now you've got issues on the UI from a mobile standpoint. I know I'm going to be a little bit harsh in saying this, but you know, so Backdrop doesn't want to. They want to do things for the 80% of users, but when it comes to accessibility, it's kind of one of the things where it's like, well, we're going to ignore the 80% and cater to the 20%. And I realize
because that number you're making up isn't real. 100% of people are going to need accessibility features at some point in their life. It's just a matter of like, you know, we're not all going to be blind. but we are all going to need to like be able to tab through form fields in the right order, right? Like that, what accessibility is very different than I think just cited versus unsighted. Like there are people with like cognition problems, there are people with mobility problems, there are people with like can't use their hands, there are people who can't use their like it's just all over the map. And so these features cover all of that. And you can't just sort of like pick and choose and be like, this one page, we're going to not use this one feature for this one type of issue.
Right. And I'm not trying to say that at all. So if you look at Windows, you look at Apple, you look at iOS, you look at Android, they all have built-in accessibility features that are an opt-in. You turn them on. They are not pushed on every single person that uses their stuff. Now, granted, they are doing some things under the hood to kind of cater to a handful of those people that are in between. But for the most part, it is an opt-in option because they understand.
And that's how our stuff is too, right? Like every browser or operating system, you can turn on the ability to use the accessibility features. But if we don't even put it there, then if someone turns on that accessibility feature and we give them nothing, like it's not opt-in on Backdrop side, it's opt-in at a different level, and that we either provide the feature or we don't.
Okay, I guess where I'm coming from then is to separate it from a visual versus non-visual, to have things set up from a visual versus non-visual standpoint. Is I agree. I mean, we need to have all the accessibility for screen readers stuff built in on the core side of things. But at the same time, there's times when visual people need to be displayed something different than non-visual people.
So, but visual and non-visual is also like, that's you making the decision what that is, because that's very different.
Screen reader versus non-screen reader.
Can I clarify?
People are using software.
Sorry,
it's very confusing because are you talking just about the developer? Because how is an end user going to make this choice? An end user can't toggle something on the site to turn on or off accessibility. That's not possible. So you either provide, so Phil, you must be talking just about the developer, right? That you just want the developer to be able to turn these things off for themselves. If they're turning it off for themselves, they're not providing it. It's not available to their users.
I think it's one key difference. One key difference that I understand what Phil is saying. That one key difference is the person that is using. There's a single person that is using the computer that turns off the on-off things. So you shouldn't be comparing it with a website which is accessed by, in theory, thousands of people at the same time. So
there's no comparison between Windows and background. There's no comparison between Windows and background. Windows is an interface between me and the computer. There's only two people involved. Backdrop is interfacing with hundreds or thousands of different users.
Yes.
So where is this toggle that I don't even understand how this is supposed to work?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, there is like, people have the option now of like choosing a dark mode for their theme, right? Like if they want, so I could see someone could create a contrib module that would have like a big button on the top of your website that would say like, make my website accessible. And it would turn on all of the features in Backdrop Core that make things accessible. But that would be a very bad move for core to support, because that would mean that 100% of the time we would be helping no one, and only if you turned that on. But if you wanted to install the module where you'd say, hey, I'm making a decision where my website is definitely not going to be accessible unless someone who needs to push this button can find the button and can push the button, can turn it on. But I think that's not something that we should consider in doing in core. And it is possible that there are websites that are like private, only used by one person, only viewed by one person, only edited by one person. And in that case, if that person says, I might get hit by a bus next week and not be able to turn on this button, but for today, I don't want this stuff on my website, and that's totally fine. They can make that decision, but I don't think that we should be making that decision on behalf of.
So part of where I'm coming from on this is, logged in, the authenticated. Yes, there's a distinction between authenticated and non-authenticated. Non-authenticated, Core needs to just flat out handle everything from a non-authenticated standpoint. That way, anything that gets put down is going to be accessible, right? So then you have the authenticated side, and you have two different groups on the authenticated side. You have people that are just general editors, then you have people who are developing the site. And so like you guys are saying, you may have 1,000 different people that all access that site, and those 1,000 different people are going to have different needs of how they view that logged in side of the site. And that's kind of where I'm coming in saying, hey, it's the user's choice of whether or not they want it to be more accessible. So long term, what I would like to see happen is a new admin theme created that it's a little bit more like WordPress. I would love to see it designed around a better JavaScript framework. I don't know what that's going to be. And I realize that there's not a lot of strong folks in the community right now that could pull that off. But the admin side of Drupal 7, even Drupal 8, it's not until they're getting into this new admin theme, I think on Drupal 9, that they're starting to bring that into the mix. And to me, it's like, it doesn't matter. Once you're logged in, everybody sees that same admin theme because it's built so well that anybody that's logged in can use that admin theme. And this is where you could have a toggle between an accessibility and non-accessibility. And if it is built on a JavaScript framework, it's all just, you click a button, it doesn't reload the page. It can just automatically change those things on the fly to go between one or the other. Now, I'm kind of thinking long-term on all this, but that's kind of what I would like to see happen with the admin side. But
So
I don't know.
I think that definitely could happen. And if someone wants to build that theme in Contrib, that's totally fine. I have zero desire to make core less accessible for anyone. I think that's a terrible idea. However, if you wanted to put an admin theme on your site that had that feature, I think that's totally fine. I do think Nate, though, has a good point that it is time for the developer meeting and not the design meeting. So we should wrap this up. But Phil, if you want to add any last comments before we do that, I'd like to give you a chance to do so.
I'm good. Just kind of think about options or ways that, we might be able to make, to me, there's things from an accessibility standpoint that are being implemented and pushed on people that don't need accessibility. And it's frustrating that, those of us that don't need those features right now, we have to deal with it. And we have to tweak those things on our end now. And anyway, all right, let's go ahead and switch over. I'm good.
Yeah, actually, it's a good topic to discuss because we took like 30 minutes to start this meeting. In 2 weeks from now, we're going to have another UX meeting, and we can discuss that again. So it's an interesting topic.
I'm going to stop the live stream.
Yeah,
Hi, everybody.
Thanks.